Welcome to the Autoimmune Doc Podcast. As always, this is your host, Dr. Taylor Crick, and I love teaching people about the underlying mechanisms behind autoimmunity and chronic and complex illness. And joining me today is Ryan Ayala. And if you didn't hear the last podcast episode, over the last couple months, Ryan and I have begun working together on some social media things and doing some more YouTube content and things like that. But I've asked him to be like basically my co-host on the podcast. Ryan's got his own story and autoimmune journey and things like that, and that's kind of how we connected. But it's sometimes helpful to me to have somebody feed me questions or just give us some things to talk about. And so Ryan's asking these questions that some of you guys have asked online or through our YouTube comments or Instagram or things like that, but also asking his own questions of like, as an autoimmune patient, as somebody who is literally wants to know more about this, asking me questions about things. And I told Ryan, and I was partially joking, of course, but I said, I know more about mold than anybody on the face of the planet. And I said, well, maybe not, and I say that humbly because I've learned from so many mentors. There's so many people out there that I've learned from that I think are smarter than me, but I've learned from all of the top mold mentors and put it into a paradigm or into action steps as far as like, well, what can people actually do? What can people actually do about it? Because I see tons and tons and tons of mold. In fact, just for the sake of rambling, I won't tell it right now, but Ryan maybe asked me about some of the last two people I've seen because they were almost identical. It's like uncanny how similar they were, but crazy mold stories. And I've got like so many crazy mold stories. In fact, I've got an old episode called Crazy Mold Stories from My Clinic. And that was like 4 years ago. I could do a crazy mold stories for my clinic already from like 2026, and it's almost March. So
Yeah.
I hear it all the time, and it's not. They say too also to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So you go see the lime doc. Guess what you're gonna have? You're gonna have lime. You go see the heavy metal guy. Guess what you're gonna have? Heavy metals. But these aren't people that I'm telling them they have mold. These are people that are coming to me saying it all started when I took this job. It all started when my basement flooded. It all started, or like I've been stuck for over a year and haven't been able to get well. And then we test their house and it's like, oh, there's a crazy amount of mold. So they're not. There's no mystery. There's still mystery. Don't get me wrong. Mold is still, very, 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 very complex and multi-systematic, and that's why it's a problem. It can affect the endocrine system, the neurologic system, the immune system for sure, the metabolic system. I mean, basically all systems can be affected by it. And there's different ways that mold can affect people too. You can have toxicity, you can have colonization, you can have a chronic inflammatory response syndrome, you can have immune reactivity, you can have a straight up allergy, you can have there's a lot of different things. And with that comes a lot of different testing too. And I've done them all. And I've listened to everybody and I've done it all. And again, there's no right way. So I think that what I do is like fit it into a paradigm of like, well, what can you do with what you've got? And again, I've seen people who, even again within the last couple of days, that who've spent 75 grand on remediation, and people who can't afford almost an air purifier or things like that. So I see a broad range of even financial situations too, and sometimes you just can't leave or move or quit your job or things like that. So anyway, I think that my approach, maybe I don't know more than anybody on the face of the earth, maybe I do, but it's because I've studied so much and read all the literature and read every study and read every expert and read every book and seen it in a thousand times. So I consider myself well versed with mold. Now, again, there's a lot of people that are my mentors in the mold world. So, and just shouting out some names, Dr. Kurt Wohler, Dr. Neil Nathan, um, Dr. Andrew Campbell, Dr. Richie Shoemaker, Dr. Pejman Katarai is a friend of mine and somebody who I believe we see a lot of mold situations through the same lens. And so we really vibe well on the mold stuff. So Dr. Jill Krista, I could keep going on and on about people that I've learned from, Dr. Sam Yannick, Dr. Karazian. Those are my top mentors. But the point is that I've learned from all those and hopefully soaked some of their knowledge up. And I know a lot about mold. So anyway, I'll stop talking, Ryan. But so today's episode is a mold masterclass where Ryan's going to ask me questions. I have done no preparation and I have no idea what he's about to ask, which is kind of fun for me. But let's rock and roll.
Let's do it. I mean, I am so excited to pick your brain because mold is something that, a lot of people aren't sure if they're dealing with it. It's something that, for myself, I live in Florida, and having it be a humid place, I go in a lot of buildings or even in my house, and I feel good, but I'm like, you know, is this something I should be concerned about on a daily basis? Is there any decisions or things I should be doing to kind of prevent being in a situation where, like so many people I've started to see, whether it's on Twitter or YouTube, who are dealing with some horrible situations. I think Chris Williamson from Modern Wisdom podcast has been very open recently about his own struggles with mold and how it's affected his life, and it's a scary thing, mold, and it's something that I think people are more and more aware of. In your line of work, what are the first things we should be thinking about, be aware of when it comes to mold toxicity for the average
Well,
person?
yeah, so great question, but I think that even some of the things that you said is like being scared of it, but not being overly scared. We always joke we don't sell plastic bubbles, and the world is not a mold-free place. You breathe tens of thousands of mold spores like on a regular basis. I forget if it's every minute or if it's every hour, but it's like a lot. And so the world is not a mold-free place, so you can't hide from it, but you want to breathe clean air. And then also something else you said, Ryan, is like, what can you do so that you're not triggered by it? Or so looking at your vitamin D, not like vitamin D is going to fix mold, but it helps. If your vitamin D is 10, you're a lot more likely to start having some symptoms and side effects and things like that. And same thing with looking at your omegas or looking at your gut health. I'm like a basics first kind of guy. And the people that come to me, the problem is they come to me in a real bad place. So but for you, if you're in a good place, then basics first for prevention: gut health, vitamin D, omega threes, and breathing clean air. So that's kind of my starting place. Now, if somebody's discovered mold, that might be a different story. Or if they've been, they discovered it and they've been living in their house 6 years, or like the toxins, the detox, those things. That's a little trickier, and that's more common in my practice. Very rarely are people coming to me asking smart questions like you just asked, like, how can I avoid this just in case it's an issue? They're usually coming to me like, crap, I didn't think this was an issue, and now I can't get out of bed in the morning. Hey, thanks a lot for listening. If you're interested in working with me one-on-one, click the link below. I'd love to help you. I'll see you in there.
Absolutely answers my question. And I want to dive into both sides of that and hit on both of those things. But to start with the prevention side of things, sauna, anything, whether it is the sauna itself or other interventions, almost like a flossing, if you will, for preventing yourself from being in that bad situation with mold.
Yeah, that's a great question and a great example, because I don't know that I could say that it's preventing anything. But let's say this, and mold creates toxins called mycotoxins. And they're basically like chemicals. So think of them like chemicals or metals or things like that. They're a physical thing, but they don't need to be killed. They need to be detoxified. And these toxins can accumulate in the body. And I think a lot of people, are aware of that with like lead or mercury or things like that, but they can accumulate in the body. And so the point of that is we always talk about the toxic bucket. And that's not new to me. That's like a lot of people talk about that. But the bucket, and the theory of a bucket makes sense, is like if you're filling it faster than you're emptying it, it's going to overflow. So that's where sauna helps, is just general detoxification. So they've done studies where mycotoxins are found in sweat. There's also other studies where they're really fascinating, where they compare like the amount of cadmium or aluminum or heavy metals in the sweat compared to urine. And there's a lot more in the sweat. So sauna is something that I do regularly. Sauna is something that I believe in. And I do think that it is a good longevity practice, but I don't know that it's necessarily mold prevention. But it's a good thought too. So and I do think that the more overall well you are, the more resilient you're going to be to mold exposures or things like that. But I don't know that sauna is necessarily going to prevent it if it's like an immune response, or some of those other mechanisms of mold. A lot of people that I see too, Ryan, they'll say they know it's mold. They've known it's mold. and they've been detoxing for like 6 months. Guess what my first thought, and they're like stuck. The people that come to me, they're stuck. That's why they're coming to me. And I'm usually like practitioner number 3, 4, 5, in the natural world. And in the mold world, we always joke that mold people have been to the neurologist, the endocrinologist, the gastroenterologist, the rheumatologist, and they all send them back to the psychiatrist and say it's all in your head. So it's usually they've had quite a journey. But anyway, if somebody's been detoxing for 6 months and they're stuck, my first thought is like, well, then that ain't your problem. That's probably not more detox is probably not going to fix it. Is there an immune reactivity? Is there a sensitivity to mycotoxins, like an antibody to mycotoxins or an antibody to molds themselves? Or is there colonization? Is there colonization of the gut? Is there colonization of the sinuses? These are all well-known things that can happen. The question is it happening for that person? But I do think that sauna is, again, a useful tool. So, again, maybe a longer answer than what you asked. But I don't know that it was necessarily prevention or just a good idea. Or if you've got high levels of toxins, heck yeah, we want to get those down so that then it might play into detox. A lot of times people do detox and they do feel better. So I'm not saying that happens all the time, but if you've detoxed and you don't feel better, then what are we doing? I just had a lady we may have even told this on the last episode, but I just had a lady do a detox, just general, and it's a good one, but her kidney filtration rate came up 20 points. So sometimes we see these things on labs, but a lot of people just feel better when they do a detox or a cleanse or whatever else.
What are some of those signs and symptoms? Because I think that mold is something that, like you described, they go to a million different practitioners. It almost gets identified as like a mystery autoimmune condition. So what are some of those signs that, like, hey, maybe these are some check engine lights for looking into deeper?
So first off, as I kind of said before, almost anything. But the problem is, if you have, let's say, one symptom, it's like, that could be a million things. But if you just start checking more and more boxes, and you're like, man, I got gut pain and bloating, and I've got anxiety, and I've got heartburn, and my menstrual cycles are off, or whatever, if you're a female, obviously. But the more symptoms you have, the more that moves up onto our radar. And there's a lot of graphics that I like to show, Ryan. And because the podcast is put out on audio, formats too, we're recording this. If you're listening to this on audio, Ryan and I are also recording this on video, and it's going to go on YouTube. But I don't want to share any graphics just for the people that can't see them. But there are graphics from studies, and I've got hundreds of them in folders. But there's some that say like the frequency of symptoms other than infections, and you can see like it goes 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and the chart just goes like up. And there's a couple of years where it goes down, but overall, and it's in 5 different people. This particular paper that was published is a family. And they just get more and more and more and more symptoms. So that's one thing to consider. The other ones that are big, though, let's say, allergies, asthma, in a kid especially, those things are huge. If somebody comes in with allergies or asthma, I'm like, do you have mold? Anxiety is a massive one. If there's anxiety that has recently worsened or is like, boy, I don't know why I'm anxious, but I can't sleep at night. Or, a lot of mold people too, they're like studying the crap out of their symptoms. So they get into this rabbit hole of like, why do I feel this way? Because they feel so weird and they're Googling different things of like, why do I feel this way? And it's just kind of, like you said, it's kind of mysterious. It's kind of hard to explain. And it drives this fear response. So it's kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg? Is it the symptoms that are causing the fear? Is it the fear is the fear a symptom itself, And so some of those are weird and hard to put a finger on, but I'd say anxiety is a big one. That's something that I experienced in mold. I also had nasal polyps, so breathing issues, viral reactivations, but allergies, asthma, histamine things, brain, neuro. Some of the neuro things that people say have are like really, really crazy, like brain zaps, which people feel like their brain's getting shocked, or light flashes, or like really crazy neuro things, or twitching, or zaps, jolts, ice pick pain. I see people with mold that are like getting worked up for MS because they're like, we can't figure out what's wrong with you. They move out and all those things start to go away or start to subside. So it's a hard question, but it's a good question. But it's not like, if you have, diarrhea, then it's like, well, check for gluten first. There's not a lot of those for mold of like that. If there's one symptom, I'm not really thinking mold. If somebody's got 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 symptoms, I'm like, okay, this is varied and complex. And then I'm definitely thinking mold.
On labs, is there any good indicators for you? Like if someone's
These
curious,
these are great questions because they're like kind of layperson questions, but like, no. No. If somebody's got, there's certain lab signs that if I see them, I'm like, oh, what if there's mold? But I might not say that out loud. Like if somebody's got elevated eosinophils, that's for sure on my radar.
mm,
Eosinophils are involved with histamine, allergies, and things like that.
and
And it's
that's just
usually
a
like
sign that the immune system is being a little activated,
A
essentially.
100%, 100%. So, and it's more on the like allergy side of the, immune side. So you could have elevated neutrophils or lymphocytes, and those neither of those really make me think mold. Those make me think like, huh, something's going on. But they don't make me think mold. It could be a million things. But the Eos and Bezos, I'm like, oh, I wonder if that's mold. But no, there are labs, like functional specific labs that are like, oh, there's mold, like an organic acids test, one of my favorite tests. And there are markers on there that say aspergillus mold. So, like, I'll tell you a story. I had a guy that came to me one time. He was referred to me by the Amen clinics, Daniel Amen clinics, because he's having a bunch of anxiety. And he's like 60. And he's a very successful guy. So his like finances are all set. And he's like, nothing to really be anxious about, but he's having anxiety. And he brings me an oat test from the Amen clinics, and it says aspergillus in like 3 places. I'm like, oh, aspergillus, that's mold. Mold's probably causing your anxiety. He's like, what? No, no, couldn't be. You're crazy. And then I was like, let's test for mold toxins. So we tested for mold toxins, and mold toxins came back positive, and the ones that he had come from aspergillus. So like, look, aspergillus, your gut said aspergillus, your toxins say aspergillus. So then he's like, okay. Then our mold, he lives up in Chicago. Our mold testing guy that lives down here in Peoria, it's like 2 hours away maybe, drove up and tested his house. Aspergillus off the charts in his office, not in other areas. And it's like that was his only problem was high aspergillus, 75,000 spores of aspergillus in his office and not in the other areas. And then at the same time, because he's uncovering this, he's got a place in Florida. And he's like, normally that would be my sanctuary. That'd be where I escape to. But now I've found there's mold there too. Because somebody hit a golf ball through his window and they didn't know it because the security camera didn't pick it up or something. So like rain was coming in through this hole. He lives on a golf course. He's got a place on a golf course down there. But rain was coming in. And so he's like, oh crap, now I got mold in both these places. But the point is, sometimes those labs are like ding, ding, ding. And it's still never a for sure. Even the oat test, I'm like, hey, let's confirm. And long story short, that guy got a lot better really pretty quickly. Once we found these things out, then it's like, okay, ding, 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 this is it. And he got his house cleaned up really quickly. He took a lot of action, and then also took the supplements, aggressively and took a lot of action there. He bought a hyperbaric chamber for his house.
Wow.
So he took a lot of action. He was researching. This is kind of interesting. He's a great guy. He's one of my, we've developed a friendship too. We went golfing together too, just as friends too. But he's super sharp. But he was researching going and getting hyperbaric. And he researched like, boy, I could buy one of these and then resell it and spend less than going and doing it. So that's what he did. And I thought that was super smart. But the point is, sometimes those labs are obvious, but sometimes people bring me also, Ryan, like a urine mycotoxin test. And it might say like your ochratoxin level is like 13, which is not that high. 7.5 is the normal level. So it's still red, it's high. And they're like, oh, I got mold toxicity. I'm like, well, I don't know. That number's not that high. And so there's a lot of nuance even to reading the test because ochratoxin can come from coffee. Ochratoxin can come from wine. Ochratoxin can come from, a cereal in the morning or from foods, or it could come from water damaged buildings. And I see it in both cases all the time. So some people out there, I know I'm rambling. Some people out there say urine mycotoxin testing is worthless. Most people that use it are like, no, it's not. But you got to know what it's telling you, and you got to know what it's not telling you. And an ochratoxin level of 13 doesn't mean like go tear down your house. It's just a clue. And there's other tests to do, and there's other clues. If somebody has an ochratoxin level of 100, I'm like, oh crap, you better call the testing guy right now and find out where that is. But there's a lot of different nuance to reading the labs because I've seen like probably thousands of mycotoxin tests and organic acids tests and things like that. So once you see thousands of them and you see the people, you just start to learn how to read what the person actually needs a little bit better, I think. But there aren't a lot of labs, unless they're mold specific labs, there aren't a lot of labs like on your vitamin D or your inflammation or your like, Labify health labs or your GI map or things like that. There's not much that's like, oh, this is mold. So a
Gotcha.
lot of times too, I'm like, mold's always on my radar, but I'm thinking like, okay, it's not mold until proven otherwise. And that's always how I think too, because again, so what if it's not, or what if it is, and what else? So nothing's ever moving it off my radar, but I just always think about the what else's.
Hmm.
Yeah,
It's so fascinating. I saw a tweet probably about 2 weeks ago from a very successful entrepreneur with a big following who lives in a luxury high rise in Miami. And the tweet was something along the lines of, "My life has been flipped upside down the past year and a half. I was having all these symptoms and come to figure out that it's mold. And um, I'm putting together this folder of people all throughout my building and other luxury high rises in Miami who are dealing with similar symptoms." And he was kind of arguing that there's this massive issue in these luxury high rises in Miami of mold all throughout the air conditioning units and all this stuff.
exactly.
Let's say you're somebody who reads that and you're like, that guy lives in my building. Are you like, huh, do I move out? What do you do in a situation where maybe you're in your shower and you see a little bit of mold or on the ceiling, or like, situations like that where it's may not be presently, you're feeling average and you're not really sure how serious to take something like that. What do you
Well,
do?
yeah. So first off, the way that I would answer that, Ryan, is like however heavy the problems are, is like the you have to outweigh the with the solution. So if you got big problems, you got to take some big solutions, right? If you got little problems, you don't got to take big solutions. You got to take little solutions. So that might be getting an air purifier. It might be getting two or three, depending on, again, it's more of a budget question more than like,
Yeah.
I know people in the health space who have, four air purifiers in a studio apartment and they can afford that, and they're just cleaning the air, all the time, and then you're breathing cleaner air. But so that's one thing to do. And so I don't know. That's my short answer. That's not that long of an answer, but it's also like if you find mold, clean it up or look and see. I had this dude one time, crazy story. I got a million crazy stories, as I said. He set okay, this is the story. He set out a ice tray on his counter and he left it there for like 3 or 4 days. And when he finally put it away, it had mold on it. And he was like, huh, why is there mold on my ice tray? Where did that come from? And he started looking around, which, first off, this is smart too. He started looking in the HVAC and he looked like, down with a flashlight through his grate. And somebody who owned the house before had cleaned like where you could see immediately. But once you looked past that, it was like full of mold. And this dude had crazy, crazy, crazy symptoms. So if there's a little bit, you go and look for, is there more? But again, there's the question of that in a high rise. It's like you got the money to look, then go look. Sometimes the question of that is like budget. Do I want to call the remediation guy? Do I want to invest into this if I rent or if it's not my place? It's like that should be the building's problem. Now, guess who's not going to want to take care of it? The building or your employer or like so. You're a lot of times your complaints are falling on deaf ears. But if you could confirm that with enough people in the building, if one person's crazy and says, I think this building's making me sick, they're not going to do anything. If 25 people in the building are saying this building's making me sick, they're going to be forced to do something. So that's one thing for that person, is like getting some weight behind you besides just like this building is making me feel weird. Usually they're right if they say that, but it's like got to be making more people right for there to be enough evidence. So I think
Hmm.
that all those are possibilities. Now, sometimes you find a big problem and then it's like moving out is the best idea. But where's that guy going to go? There's mold in a lot of places. There's a movie. Have you ever seen Moldy the movie?
I have not, no.
It's a documentary.
Moldy the movie?
Yeah, do you know Dave Asprey from
Yes, of course.
Bulletproof? Yeah,
Yep, yep.
yeah. So Dave Asprey made this movie like 15 years ago. Dave Asprey's story all started from mold. So before Bulletproof and before you know whatever he's doing now, it all started from mold. He was over 300 pounds and he had all these health symptoms and blah blah blah. But it all started from mold, and so he's very knowledgeable about mold. So he funded this documentary called Moldy. But one of the dudes that's interviewed in the movie lived in a high rise in New York City that was right across the street from Central Park. And he was like, "This is my dream. This is like the pinnacle of my success. Like I got the high rise place." And he started getting sick, and it was long story short, there was humidity and mold in the halls and in the shared airspace. And now even with energy efficiency, buildings being LEED certified or energy efficient certified, it's even worse, I think, because there's less airflow. They're more airtight. They want to be tight on the energy and things like that. So there's even bigger concerns with the newer builds. But I think also to your point of your story, like it's not all like Katrina victims in New Orleans. It's like nice places. Another story that I had was this lady, and all I know is there's a lot more to this story, but I know they had 300,000 worth of mold remediation. So it's like their house was not cheap, and the mold remediation was not cheap, and they had the money to do that and things like that. But mold does not really care, and sometimes it's worse in some of those, nicer, bigger places too. But if you suspect that, and the other thing too, Ryan, is like I think that in the social media world, you could prey on people that are desperate. So if you're suspicious of mold, my first thought is like, don't act on that suspicion. Like build some more evidence. Same with that person in the building. If five other people in the building are feeling weird, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And so if it's just one person feeling weird, or let's say it's a family and there's a family of 10 and one person feels weird, that's a serious question that I ask people too. How's everybody else in your family doing? And a lot of times
Mhm.
there's one person that's doing the worst and there's one person that's like unaffected completely, like often a husband, but they think they are. They think they are. But if more and more people are being affected, then there's more and more evidence. And I've seen, like if one family with 13 kids and like two of them had gut things, like hospitalized gut things, two of them had more OCD, two of them had more asthma and allergies, and then six of them were normal, or whatever. But it's hard to say is mold causing all these things. But again, if the number of symptoms in a house or the number of symptoms in a person just keeps clicking up and up and up, then it moves higher on our radar.
Whew,
Yeah,
mold.
there's a lot to unpack.
A lot to unpack. And I guess that leads us to what to do about it, Um, it's such a multifaceted question because I know you're such a nuanced thinker. And so everything seems like it's a very case by case basis. But to give some general guidelines or principles or things that, someone who either suspects or knows for a fact that they got mold issues going on or mold in their house and they don't feel good, all this type of stuff. How are you approaching that?
Case by case, but also just seeing what are you able to do? What do you want to do? How willing are you? How accepting are you of this being your problem? If somebody comes to me knowing that it's their problem, they probably already have like 3 air purifiers. If somebody comes to me and they've never heard of mold, they're an air purifier. But it's very case by case, and it's also too like I'll do a lot of education, so I'll send them YouTube videos from the past. I have a YouTube video that I made only because I felt like people weren't looking at the documents that I was sharing with them about mold. And so I made a YouTube video that's like got mold, start here or something like that. Um
We'll
and
link that in the description of this video.
exactly. And in that video, I go through I think 5 documents that I've accumulated throughout the years from other experts. Some are from like the Change the Air Foundation. Change the Air is an awesome foundation, and they're trying to change like legislature around this and things like that. But So maybe a little more global or bigger impact than on the individual basis. But they've put out some free content and some free downloads and things like that. So there's a couple good companies that make, some good educational content, and I've amassed all of that. I've got it all. So honestly, my mold, literature collection is pretty overwhelming, but I'll share it with people, and it says like, here's where you start. Here's what you do. Here's how you can select an air purifier. Here's how you can dust your house. Here's some things that you can do. So there's a bunch that you can do, Ryan, that's where it starts for me is like I send people because I like to lead a horse to water and then see if it drinks kind of thing, So I might just send them the literature or send them some of those things and then say, what can I help you with or what questions do you have? I don't remember what your original question was, but I thought about something else too, so I'm just going to keep talking. But
Yeah, keep
maybe
going.
going back to your last question, there's other things you can do for suspicion, like doing a dust test or doing an ERMI test that you do DIY or doing mold plates that are the least accurate but the least expensive. And I've got a boatload of, examples of people's mold plates that they've sent me, and it's like you could see by looking at it, it's like, okay, you got a lot of mold like in your house, like there's a lot growing on those mold plates. Then I still think you need testing to know, well, where is it, what species is it, things like that. Or a dust test or an ERMI test is just like a one-time dust sample. But like, let's say again, that guy in the high rise, if he's just seeing a little mold in his shower and he's kind of suspicious, put a plate in there. See if anything grows. Do a dust test. See if you get anything back. The another thing just to mention is the plates are like $5. Dust test a couple $100. So there can be an order of operations based on like, let's do some little cheap testing first, and just knowing that a clean plate test does not mean your house is clean. It just means your plate was clean, but it moves it down the radar, and a dirty plate moves it up the radar. So it's still a useful test. It's kind of like urine mycotoxin. It does not solve the whole puzzle, but if it's low, it moves it down the radar. If it's high, it moves it up the radar. And that's how we don't want to utilize these things. But then let's say somebody has mold. They know they have mold. Then they got to put together a plan. And you can do that on your own. You can have professionals do that. But there's 3 levels, I would say, Ryan. Like the first is, can you do it DIY? And sometimes the answer is yes. Now, maybe to some people, unpopular opinion in the mold world but there's all these different, opinions. So I'm not going to worry about that. But there's a ton you can do DIY. There's a ton you can do DIY. Now, I wouldn't suggest if you got a heavy mold problem, I wouldn't suggest going and getting exposed. Or if you do, I would suggest, Tyvek suit and mask and all the things as far as proper precautions. But there's a ton you can do DIY. Sometimes it's just like deep dusting your house. I've seen people that did a deep dusting of their house and their symptoms went away. And so was it mold? Oh, mold likes dust. So it could have been mold or it could have been dust. So sometimes it's just we want to breathe clean air. And it's not always like, people have this thought of mold like there's green on the walls or like my house is dirty or it's not well kept or like it's a personal attack or something like that. But sometimes it's dust. Sometimes it's a wood burning stove. Sometimes it's a fireplace. Sometimes it's formaldehyde in the carpet like I had also. So I think the point is we want to breathe clean air. And so an air purifier can clean the air, or you can physically go and remove particles like dust, and that cleans the air as well. Or you can get your ducts with a T, your ducts cleaned,
Mhm.
or you can do things like that aren't like knocking down walls and ripping out drywall, but it's still just how can I breathe cleaner air?
And then I guess maybe the way to ask this would be like, what did you do in the sense of after the cleanup process in terms of supplementation or diet or whatever remedies you would use? What are some of those key movers that either you
Yeah,
did or you tend to see help people?
yeah. So first off, the first thing is like we just said is like if somebody comes to me with mold and a bunch of symptoms and things like that, you got to get it out of it or clean it up first. And because you cannot dry off while you're still in the shower. Now, that does not mean that we can't make progress. In fact, I want to show you this picture, but I won't because it's a podcast. But I just showed it to my patient before. But I got this picture of this gnarly, gnarly mold. And I
You
have a
still
picture of
scarred me from the last photo you showed me of
that
mold.
that one's insane. This one is not. So I showed Ryan this picture of literally a mushroom that grew out of somebody's ceiling in the bedroom they were staying in, and it's like, I mean, it's a full grown big old mushroom, like multiple mushrooms. This other one is like straight black behind the walls. And the point is, I had this text from this girl and that I screenshotted, and it says, "My house just flooded. The flooding's been happening for a long time. I didn't know it because it's behind my walls, and I didn't know it." And I said, "From my impression, we were already making great progress." And she said, "Yeah, I was already improving tremendously, but I think this was working against me the whole time." So my point of showing that and saying that is you can still make good progress with people even if they're exposed to mold, but it makes it a lot harder. So it's got to be the first step. Or if somebody's not getting well, or if somebody's been to 5 different practitioners and they're stuck and they're not getting well, you know, that one with the mushroom, her sister just found a bunch of mold and they were stuck. They were working with another practitioner and they just felt stuck for her and her son. And I'm like, if somebody's stuck and they're working on their health, then it's like, well, crap, why? What's keeping you stuck? So some of those are little clues too of like, hey, have you considered this or have we looked into this? But so I think the environment does matter the most. But then it's like, what do we do about it? And it is really person dependent again. You know, you're going to get sick of me saying that, but it kind of depends. If somebody's got asthma, allergies, we're working on histamine right away. Histamine, you know, maybe glutathione, their airways, you know, calming down their airway inflammation. If somebody's got gut things, we might be working on their gut right away. You know, or if somebody's got fatigue, we might be working on their mitochondria just right away. Or some of those things that I often do, Ryan, I'll often like, let's say most people that come into me, we're gonna run labs. So I always tell them our lab targets are gonna be step number 2. Let's wait till the labs get back and then we'll shoot at whatever we find. But what are the step number ones? And that's where, you know, those are symptoms and mechanisms that can't always be seen on labs, like histamine, hard to see on labs, neuroinflammation, hard to see on labs, neuroexcitation, where people get like a lot of anxiety, super, super common in mold and well known in the literature. And if I'm telling somebody this too, Ryan, I'm trying to talk fast in the podcast, but I'll show them pictures, I'll show them studies, and by the time I show them 2, 3 things, they're like, okay, yeah, this is what's going on, and this is what I need to do about it. But it's priorities first of like whatever the most urgent symptom is. So another thing that I draw a lot is like short term, middle term, and long term action steps. The short term is like the symptoms. So when I meet somebody and they're suffering with X, Y, or Z symptom, I'm like, okay, this is what we need to do right away. And then in the long term, might be like, what's your vitamin D level? What's your omega-3 level? And those are important in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, your 60s. You know, they're long-term important. In the middle term, might be like, what do we need to do in your gut? Or what do we need to do to detoxify? So I think that the lever movers, there's a ton of different supplements that we use, but they're going to fall into like those few categories. It's going to be inflammation. And then we're taking some things and saying, let's see if some of your inflammatory symptoms calm down in the first month. Or excitation, let's see if some of your anxiety symptoms calm down, or your overactive nerves, tinnitus, vertigo, insomnia, you know, or let's see some of your histamine symptoms are going to calm down. That's really, really common in my practice is that we're starting off by supporting histamine because
Hmm.
histamine, and when I say histamine too, I mean mast cells and everything that's involved with that. It's like a very, 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 again, like nuanced conversation, kind of like mold, but it's also like really helpful for people and they feel better. And then we build upon that foundation. It might work on their gut for a couple months. But going back to your original question, the 2 things that are the most famous for mold are glutathione and binders. And those are probably the 2 that are the biggest needle nudger that I've seen. Besides these other ones that I just said, sometimes people take, you know, anti-inflammatories and it's like, oh my gosh, I could think again.
Mm.
And it's like, okay, good. But glutathione is often really, 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 really helpful. Mold depletes glutathione. Glutathione is also the main thing that detoxifies mold. So it's kind of like a vicious cycle of like you don't have glutathione, so you don't detox, so then you get more mold, and then you get less glutathione. It's like just keeps going and going and going. Um, and binders. Now, I sometimes see binders like nudge the needle for people right away, But otherwise, it's just a generally well accepted good idea to do different binders. And there's different, again, opinions on binders of like cholestyramine, which is a pharmaceutical that Sears practitioners use. Sears is chronic inflammatory response syndrome. And I don't buy into it, but it's not, I'm not saying it's not real, but Sears doctors think that Sears is the only way and you can only do things this way and there's no other
Mm.
way. And it's like in real life, it's like that ain't true. Like I see people get well all the time and I don't do Sears stuff. And so Sears
It's like the
doctors like,
hammer analogy.
exactly. And I don't know. I could go on a whole rant about Sears stuff, but it's still there's still things to learn from Sears practitioners in the labs and the mechanisms. But to say that cholestyramine or Welchol are the only two binders you could ever use is just not factually true. So sometimes we use charcoal or carboxy or biotoxin binder or things like that, and sometimes people are like, "That was a game changer." But otherwise, that's just generally something that most people are doing for mold. Because if you Google it or read about it, everybody talks about doing binders.
Very fascinating. I think that the histamine conversation is one that you don't hear too often. People talk about histamines, and so for the person who is hearing histamines and they maybe not maybe all they when they think of histamines, all they know is allergies, whether that's like seasonal or from a cat or something like that. Which in my
Hmm.
personal case, like I get seasonal allergies and I'm allergic to a cat. Um, what do we need to know about like histamines in general and its relation to mold?
Yeah. So the mast cells, I always try to enunciate the T. The mast cells release histamine. Now they also release like 300 other things, like inflammatory cytokines and other, compounds and mostly driving inflammation. Histamine is just the most famous because we got our antihistamine medications and things like that. And so we talk about histamine because again, it's a word that people know about and they've heard, but it's really not just about histamine. But histamine also is a close relative of dopamine and adrenaline. So histamine's a neurotransmitter. So histamine not can cause neuro symptoms, and that's very well known, or not. It's very well known in the literature. It's not well known in like the public because there's no medication for it. There's H1 blockers, which are like Claritin and Zyrtec, and that's for sinus and allergies. There's H2 blockers, which are Zantac and Pepcid, and that's for reflux. Those are antihistamines. But the brain things are also histamine. So these mast cells get triggered by things like cats in your example, or pollen or ragweed or whatever. But mold will trigger them in a non allergic way. So 24/7, 365 in a non IgE dependent way. One of the studies I show people all the time, it says Aspergillus fumigatus triggers non IgE dependent mast cell degranulation or something like that. So that's what that means is it's not allergy. It won't show up on an allergy test. It's just you're triggering these all the time. So that's what the mast cells do is they respond to dangers. And so if you're living in the danger, they're responding all the time. And that you're just getting more and more histamine or more and more inflammation. And so your symptoms in your bucket just go up. So it might be like again a girl I just saw. I see this all the time. She has every histamine symptom except sinus stuff. Histamine is not on her radar because she's never been a Claritin Zyrtec allergy person. But I showed her and she's got diarrhea, she's got anxiety, she's got, these lightheadedness, she's got this itching. I was like, boom, histamine, and showed her to her on a picture from a study. And she was like, yeah, I got that, I got that, I got that, I got that. It's like, okay, sweet. That's what's tying a lot of this together and is calming down these mast cells. But a lot of the things that are done, Ryan, even if they aren't for mast cells, they're still good. Like you detoxify the body, that helps. You work on the gut, that helps. You take, regular supplements like vitamin C, that helps stabilize the mast cells. So the mast cells just are I don't know, I would call them like a teaching tool of like explaining why people feel the way that they feel with these toxins or exposures. And then also they're a lever to pull with like histamine supporting supplements. but they're kind of like a hub that connects a lot of these dots, whether it be mold or it be metals or it be, autoimmunity or all the things that we talk about often. And also too, like the dangers, we talk about dangers, and the cell danger response is something that I like to nerd out on a lot. But the dangers, what's the danger? Well, if you're living in mold, it's mold. If you're living next to a power plant, it might be pollution or something else. But if there's danger in the air, there's danger in your environment, your body's not going to want to chill out. It's going to be like hyper vigilant or whatever. And so that's what mast cells do. Is they're kind of like the alarm system. And I always say it's like an alarm system on your house. If somebody comes and kicks in your front door, you want the sirens to go off. That's what it's there for. But when mast cells get more easily activated, it's almost like every time a leaf blows by, it's like danger, danger, danger. And sometimes that's because you're living in danger and you don't really know it because it's behind your walls or something like that. But mast cells, between mold and mast cells, which are like literally the centerpiece of my entire practice, there's a lot to unpack with those from a lab standpoint, from a like, well, why do some people feel this way or some people not or whatever, from a diagnosis standpoint, because virtually nobody that I see has mast cell activation syndrome. It's very, 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 very rare. So even if you hear on a podcast, like, oh, I think I got mast cells. Well, we all got mast cells. They're an immune cell. We all got them. But you go to your doctor, you say, I think I got mast cell activation syndrome. No, you don't. Because it's very, 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 very tight diagnostic criteria with tryptase and some other measurements that just very rarely do people qualify for. I've more often, Ryan, I know I'm rambling again, but I've more often had people who have the diagnosis mast cell activation syndrome, and they'll tell me, they're like, I didn't meet the diagnostic criteria, but my doctor diagnosed me with it anyway because I've got so many symptoms that match that I've been diagnosed with MCAS. But there's MCAS, which is mast cell activation syndrome. There's histamine intolerance, which is foods, histamine in foods. And some people don't have either of those diagnoses. Most people do not have either of those diagnoses. But that doesn't mean that mast cells aren't involved. Like you've got allergies. Guess what? Mast cells are involved in your health case. And that means that they're also involved in your autoimmune journey too, Ryan, because yours isn't strictly, mast cell mediated, and neither is mine, but they're involved for all of us because they're involved with this level of inflammation, and they're involved with this level of danger and all these things, and they're involved in the gut, and they're involved in the brain, and they're involved.
Yep.
So
I mean,
they're a big lever to pull too. But yeah, mold and mast cells, there's unlimited amounts to unpack with those two things. And when you do, you help sick people get well. So they're super important.
no doubt. And let us know in the comments if you want us to do a separate episode just on mast cells and histamines, because, there's a million different directions we could go in that of what it means with seasonal allergies and when you have allergies. And there's just so many different directions. So if that's something you guys are curious in, we can do a whole hour and a half long deep dive in that sometime soon.
Yeah, and I love that too because, I have podcasts about mast cells, but it's just me talking. But one of the reasons why, even asking you to help co-host the podcast is like, go back and listen to those and cool. But like, I some points it's like, I don't want to repeat myself. I've already said that, but I want to ask, what are the real questions people have? Because people come in and it's so rare that people understand this, or it's so rare a lot of times that people have even mentioned this. They've worked with a bunch of other practitioners. And like I saw somebody recently that's, did a year-long Lyme protocol and she got way worse. Nobody's ever talked about mast cells. Her MD referred her to me because he's heard my podcast about mast cells. And so he referred her to me. And it was like, okay, but so
Sounds like a good MD.
exactly, he
Yeah.
is. But the point is that it's crazy. It is, like you said, oh, no, not very many people know about histamine. In my mind, it's like the trendiest. Histamine and mold and mast cells are like super trendy since COVID. But my understanding of the health world is different than a lay person's or just a person, and you're, I don't know, just I don't want to say a lay person, Ryan, but You're not a
I'm most
medical
definitely a
practitioner or
layperson.
whatever, healthcare practitioner. You have an autoimmune journey, and you're more tied in than the typical like accountant or something like that. So and you're super knowledgeable. So I didn't mean to be insulting or anything, but
No,
just means
absolutely
like
not.
I think it's super trendy, but it might not be. But nobody seems to come in knowing about it or having addressed it. Yeah.
So when it comes to getting back to the mold conversation, so we discussed glutathione, we discussed binders. Anything else you've seen really move the needle for people in terms of supplementation or maybe diet stuff, or even just like protocols like a sauna or anything like that?
No. Nothing, because all those things are like, again, they're general advice about like eat bright colors, strong flavors. It's very, again, if somebody comes into me and they're super bloated, then it's like, don't do that. Eat, low FODMAP or things like that. But no, I think that in general, all the general life advice still stands. Like, hey, sauna once a week if you can, exercise 3 times a week, eat, your healthy diet and bright colors and strong flavors, and you low carb or low-ish, just not super high sugar, super glycemic. I would call that, I don't want to say generic because it's true, but all that stuff still 100% stands. I mean, any good advice of just like how to live to 100 it applies to every single thing that we see, whether it's rheumatoid arthritis or it's mold or it's MS or it's whatever. But it kind of depends on that. Like I saw again a lady yesterday that she can't walk around the block. So I'm not like, hey, go to the gym, get your 150 minutes of cardio each week or anything like that. It's like uh, she can't. Or if somebody's really bloated and their gut is a wreck and they're trying to eat, just a Mediterranean healthy diet or a paleo diet or something like that, sometimes they can't. They feel like crap. They feel bloated. So just for the sake of not trying to say a blanket statement that's not true, my short answer is going to be no. Or some people, again, all these are true stories. Someone get in a sauna and they have a panic attack. That's a true story of that happened with somebody here, and she also too, like she had a bunch of mold. This is years ago. She got rid of it. She's doing well. She's doing great. She still comes in about once a year. She just brought her daughter in recently, and she's having some problems. And I was like, "You're gonna hate to hear this, but I think mold." And she's like, "I do hate to hear that." The mom was texting me recently about her daughter, and I was like, "You're gonna hate to hear what I'm gonna say that sounds like, but it sounds like mold." It was like 5 years ago that they cleaned up all their mold. But anyway, this girl, when she came in, she was like, "I don't sweat." I was like, "Oh, really?" I hear that all the time too, but she doesn't sweat, and so she got in a sauna and had a panic attack. And I don't know if that's why, but the other part of that story too, Ryan, is a year later, the next summer, she was like, "I'm sweating now. I sweat normal." So sweat is something that you can see sometimes turn off, turn on, turn back off, turn back on, and it's just like a sign of toxins, or your body's not detoxing. It's a weird one, and it's not like here's the supplement for sweat. But as we work on all these mechanisms and underlying things, that turns back on for people. And then it's like normal, or sometimes they'll go through a phase where it's like weird or things like that, where sweat will change as they're detoxing. But all of those are signs of dysfunction if they're off. And then when they're normal, they're just signs of function. And we want to restore normal function. But there's not, because again, the number of people that I've seen, it's not like everybody needs a B vitamin and everybody needs this. Even glutathione. I mean, a certain percentage of mold people don't tolerate glutathione, and maybe it's not a high number. It might be like less than 25% for sure. But or there might be some people that come back in and they're like, "What was that you gave me? I need more." Or there's other people that's like, that didn't nudge the needle for me that much. So it's like, okay, good guess. Let's try something else. But anti-inflammatories, antioxidants, B vitamins, zinc, magnesium, again, some of the more common things can sometimes be needle nudgers for people, but there's nothing that's universal.
What does it mean if someone's not much of a sweater?
Just that have some detox issues. It doesn't mean, and it's hard to say. Like, you could go into all the science of like, is their lymph moving, or is the sympathetic nervous system regulates the pseudomotor, which is sweating. So like, but it's basically toxic. And so as somebody, detoxifies, then sometimes that turns that on. So that's why I think that's a clue. Because A, it's a detox pathway. I always say you can only get things out certain ways. You can poop them out, pee them out, breathe them out, or sweat them out. And so I always say, like, imagine you're at a, bar and somebody pulls the fire alarm and there's four doors, but only three of them are open. Well, if you open up that fourth door, you're going to get more out faster. We get things out more efficiently. So it's just like, why is that door locked? Why is that door stuck? And I don't know why. I'm sure somebody smarter than me could be like, it's because the mold affects this, because it affects this, it affects this. But there's a lot of people that go into the blah blah blahs of like, this is why it happens. But in real life, toxins. And so as people detoxify, whatever that might mean for them, we see it turn back on. I saw this dude in Florida one time, so he gets a chance to sweat a lot. He was like, his sweat was off, then it turned back on working with another practitioner before me. And then he quit working with them and it turned back off. And so when he came to me, he wasn't sweating. And when we started working on things again, it turned back on again. And he's like, now I'm sweating again. And they'd had a bunch of mold. And again, I can't say like it was because he moved or it's because he took glutathione or because he did this any one thing. But over the course of, a couple of months and some, moving supplements in or out or some musical chairs of some supplementation based on his presentation, it turned back on. And it's a sign of normal function instead of being a sign of dysfunction.
Very fascinating. It's
Why do you ask? Do you sweat?
I'm not much of a sweater. No.
I could tell. I could tell that you asked for a reason. I'm not like a soak through my shirt kind of sweater.
Yeah,
I
me
never,
either, me
never,
either.
never have been. Playing basketball or hockey or things like that. So sometimes it's just genetically how you're wired. Even my son, who's 7, he turns 8 this weekend. He's like a, he's like a freaking gross heavy sweater for some reason. And we're like, where did you get that from, man? Wake up in like a pool of sweat from his sleeping. And maybe that'll change. But I don't think of it as a sign of dysfunction. I just think like
Yep.
that's how he is, and it's just like, okay. But yeah,
Anything else in the world of mold that we haven't covered that we'd be remiss if we didn't mention?
man, I don't know. I could answer a million other questions too. I think that the questions that people have are often personalized. Like, why did I take this and feel worse? Why did I do this and feel worse? When everybody on the internet says I should feel better from glutathione, or everybody says I need methylated B vitamins, or everybody says I need to do coffee enemas or something like that. So I think that one of the problems with even the world that you and I live in, we use Instagram a lot and post things, but you got to take it all with a grain of salt. It's all like education, but then how you apply it is very, 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 very personalized. And if somebody reacts negatively to anything, first off, one of the important things from a psychological standpoint, but also from a clinical standpoint, is like, I believe them. I always believe everybody if they're like, that made me feel dizzy. I'm like, okay, we just figure out why and we just don't do that again. But
Hmm.
in the mold world, they're gaslit, they're marginalized, they've been told they're crazy like over and over and over again. That's incredibly, incredibly common. So if your symptoms are your symptoms, I'm not going to try to tell you they're wrong. I'm going to be like, okay, what does that mean? Or I'm going to be like, I don't know what that means. That's weird. And I say that to people all the time, like, oh, that's weird. I don't know why that's happening. So, but there's I don't even remember where I was going now, Ryan, but there's a ton more to talk about, but with the individualized questions, but that's also really hard to do on a podcast too. So we do try to be general, we try to be universal, but I think that some of these, it's a universal truth that everybody's unique. So that might be the mic drop moment is like that is the general statement is like your puzzle is going to be different than somebody else's. So the first thing that I would do if you're suspicious of mold is go and learn a bunch about it. Not from one guru or one person or one expert. Get on some newsletters, listen to some podcasts, listen to a few different people because if you start listening, because that's what I found with all the different gurus that are out there. In the mold world, it's a well known thing that some of them don't like each other. And it's like this person says that everybody else sucks, and this person says that everybody else sucks, and then this person says that everybody else sucks. And so for a lot of us as practitioners trying to learn from these people who we trust and value their expertise, and they're like, you could never use urine mycotoxin test. And then you go to the next seminar and they're like, I love this urine mycotoxin test. And you're like, well, which one of you is right? There's a lot of personalization and customization, and then all these tools, they all have a purpose at some point. And I could tell you a story of like every single thing we've talked about. I could tell you a story of it changing somebody's life, whether it be professional remediation, or be getting a dust test, or be getting doing a mold plate, or it be glutathione, or it be binders, or it be certain supplements. I could tell you at least one story for every single one of those. But sometimes you got to dig a little bit deeper. Or let's say you do one lab and it's negative, but you're still suspicious of mold. Well, then you just didn't do the right lab yet. Or it's not mold. But if you're still suspicious and all the signs point to mold, and if your urine mycotox was negative or your dust test was negative, the labs don't show you everything. So sometimes you got to keep digging, but also sometimes it's not mold. I've also seen people. I saw this girl one time, her sister had had really severe mold toxicity. So she knew about mold. And she had her house tested and there was no mold. But she was convinced it was mold. And I don't disagree with that. So she had it tested again. And there was no mold. And she was still just, sometimes people get it in their head that it's mold or that it's Lyme or that it's whatever they think it is. And they're not open to the alternatives. And I was like, it's not mold. It's something else. I'm not saying it's nothing in your environment. Maybe it's again formaldehyde, or maybe it's LPS, or maybe it's, there's other things that can trigger, inflammatory responses or mold or biotoxin illness or things like that. But if it's not mold, sometimes it's not mold. But so you got to like follow these clues. And I think that's another thing that I would say big picture is like, if you've got a clue that you think it's mold, so what? It's good, but try to build that case. Try to build more evidence, try to build more signs and symptoms, and don't try to create these and try to, make it be mold, but try to look and say, like, I get this, I get this, I get this. So does my wife. She gets this and she gets this. So did my kids. They get this and they get this. And oh, yeah, I did feel better when I went to Florida on vacation for a week, or I did stop coughing, or things like that. All these are like, as I say, like, they're coming from real stories.
Mm-hmm.
People that go to Florida and they're like, I stopped coughing for a week. And then I came back and I'm coughing again. And then I went to Florida again and I stopped coughing for a week. And then I came back and I'm like, okay, what do you think you're leaving? What do you think you're coming back to? So we follow these little clues. And that's what I would say, Ryan, is like learning about it, learning what people use, learning what people do. There's some people that aren't big on glutathione, but if you look in the mold world, it's one of the tried and true, like
Mm-hmm.
biggest things that's been around for the last, couple decades. But it's also true that it's not perfect for everybody, and not everybody is going to benefit from it and need it and things like that too. So a lot of nuance, and labs can just help guide some of that, because you'll hear things like, "Oh, I've been on antifungals for 3 months. I'm not doing any better." And I'm like, "Did you have fungal colonization?" And they're like, I don't know. I lived in mold. I'm like, well, then there you go. Like, you're just shooting at something that somebody told you was there, and it's not really even there. Like, you gotta, even if you think it's there, you gotta confirm it. Or if you're shooting at it, you don't have to confirm everything. But if you're shooting at it and it doesn't seem like you're hitting it, it ain't there. You're shooting in the shadows and you're not hearing a scream, then nothing's in the shadows. All these different things, Ryan. I don't know. I could ramble on and on. A lot of them are just like clinical tips, but they're real life of like how do real
No doubt.
people get well from this? Because I see it all the time. I mean, the best thing about mold too is that the prognosis is good. So the overwhelming majority of the cases that I see, 90%, they're happy with the progress that they've made. I very rarely see somebody that's stuck, or I almost never see somebody that's just straight sliding backwards. Um, so people can get well. They don't
Yep.
have, it
There's hope
doesn't
there.
have to, yep, exactly. So I'll stop. But yeah,
I think, and I don't want this to sound like a commercial for, you know, working with you or working with any practitioner in general, but I just know from my own experience and from so many people in my life, and a lot of times it's gut issues, but you're when you are on that journey and you are Googling in the middle of the night, you could save so much time by just working with a practitioner and so much headache. And if you could just find someone good that you trust, so many of your issues get solved. And I say that because I could think of two specific examples. One is actually an influencer, and the other one is a friend who had serious gut issues, both of them. My friend went to the conventional route and got diagnosed with ulcerative colitis and was on this type of medication and was also, researching a ton on his own and trying to figure it out and all this stuff. And then the influencer became a carnivore, and she was a big carnivore influencer on Instagram and all that stuff. But both of those people started working with a functional medicine practitioner 2-3 years into their journey, and they had made progress because they had learned and learned and learned. But they had started working with a functional medicine practitioner. They did GI map tests. And then they found all these issues with their tests, H. pylori and all this other stuff going on in their gut. And then their practitioner, put them on specific protocols for what they found on their tests. And they made more progress in that condensed time period of working with their functional medicine practitioner than in all of those years in the maze themselves. And I just say that to say it's very easy to feel like you're on your own in this journey and to want to try to figure it out yourself. But by working with a practitioner, you just can go so much faster.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all, Ryan. And of course, I think hey, I can help. Let's say somebody I don't know where I was going to go with this, but if you're not getting well, then you're not aiming at the right things. Not like we have all the answers, but if it's oh, we found Lyme and it's Lyme, well, then working on Lyme should yield you improvement. I have a beef with Lyme because a lot of people go through a year of Lyme treatment and they're like, I felt worse. Well, why didn't you give up after 2 months or so? I would never go a year of feeling worse. It was I would quit because it's this ain't working. If I'm taking golf lessons and my score's going up, I ain't taking from that coach anymore. You know what I mean? It ain't working. So, but yes, I do think that a practitioner can just guide you, or labs too. Labs can just guide you. I see so many people that are doing so many supplements, and they're all things that I use. So I use all supplements because I own a supplement store. But it's why are you using this? You didn't have that problem. Oh, I read about it online, or somebody told me that I needed to, or whatever it is. So what do you need? And looking at the practitioner, looking at labs, all those things. I'll tell you one last story just because it popped into my head with some of the things you were talking about. And it's kind of funny because I'm remembering that this guy texted me yesterday and I haven't replied to him because I marked it as read. But we've become buddies. But I had this guy, he's a patient of mine, and he had mold, and he got his PhD at Cornell, and he lived in a moldy apartment. And it is all documented because by the time he moved out, long story short, he was walking with a cane. He had ankylosing spondylitis, and he'd asked his landlord and told him that there was a musty smell and confirmed all this mold, and he got an actual medical diagnosis. So I thought there's a chance that he would win, a lawsuit if it ever came to that. But longer story shorter, he was doing carnivore. And he was still flared. He was doing carnivore, trying to fix his gut and trying to fix his arthritis, and just he had a little flare. He was doing great. Then he had a little flare, and he was doing carnivore. And this is over the course of many years. But he sent me a picture or a video earlier this year. He was at Saladino's house in Costa Rica, and they were jumping off the roof into Saladino's pool. So he's hanging with Saladino, who's a big carnivore influencer. But he'd had this inflammatory marker that was high, and in June he did 2 GI maps, which I always think is cool because he did one on Monday and one on Wednesday to compare them, because he was I want to see if these are accurate and the same. And they showed the exact same thing, but they were different. One was 2 reds and one was 1 red, and they're just a little bit worse or better, but the same exact problems showed up. But anyway, he cut out red meat and eggs, and his inflammatory marker dropped drastically. And he sent me a text of it, and I have a picture of it, and I show it to people. It's sometimes we just don't know. But you keep looking, and sometimes you think you're doing the right thing, but if it ain't working, it ain't working. And sometimes you got to head the other direction. I always tell people, again, we're in Illinois. I say if we're driving from here to Colorado, if we start seeing palm trees, we are going the wrong way. So if you're not seeing some, and I tell people too, like, we might not be seeing the mountains yet. So we got to keep going. But if you start seeing palm trees or it starts getting warmer, we are going the wrong way. So you want to be aware of that too, because sometimes what you think might be right might not be right for you. Carnivores helped a lot of people. I'm not opposed to it at all, and neither was he. But it just wasn't right for his body, and it just took some discovery and continued work and even some investment, because even doing 2 GI maps in a week is expensive because like you got to do 2 of them. So you had to pay for 2 of them. But that's sometimes what it takes is continuing to look, continuing to dive, continuing to figure out, well, what could be right for me instead of just like, what does the internet tell me I should do?
It's a beautiful place for us to end here. Dr. Taylor, appreciate
And
you for
now,
your time as always.
and now I'm going to go reply to this guy on text and I'm going to tell him this story. I say, hey, I just talked about you on a podcast.
Awesome.
Super, super, super sharp dude too, so loves what we do, and the content and the direction and education of everything too. So that's why we've become buddies.
Awesome. Well, like and subscribe, guys. If you have any comments on stuff that we mentioned today or any things you want us to discuss in more details, please let us know in the comments, and we will see you next time.
Yeah, and just to sorry, but to jump on
continue.
that too, but Ryan and I are planning on doing these weekly of just podcasts. So and he's gonna be my co-host. I'm still gonna do some more interviews this year too. I've got a couple scheduled. Ryan's also going to interview me about some of the topics. So if we do something like we're going to do a thyroid masterclass, he's going to interview me and ask me questions just to guide the conversation so that I just don't ramble on. But so ask your questions. Don't hesitate to drop those in the comments or follow us on Instagram, all those things. But I really want to keep the podcast alive and going. So we're going to start doing these weekly. So, yeah, keep your eye out for that. So like and subscribe, like Ryan said, and we'll see you guys next time.